Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. With the holiday just around the corner, are you ready to tread the bunny trail? Or dread in the very least? So, put on your floppy ears and hide the candy. This one's more frightening than a rabbit that lays eggs. The reason I hate Easter.
Easter is right around the corner. I can't stand Easter. Never have had much love for it ever since I was a child. What kind of child wouldn't like Easter, you ask? I know, with all the candies, egg hunts, and stuffed animals, what's not to love? Well, for me, mostly the Easter Bunny. I'm sure the last thing most of you find terrifying is a 6-foot-tall bunny rabbit covered in white, fluffy fur that brings joy to kids every year. For those of you who may find him unsettling, it's likely due to the unnatural visage of an oversized stuffed creature, or maybe those inanimate eyes. However, my fears are much more specific than correlations with random, unnatural stimuli. I have memories to tie into my terror, solidifying its existence and making it all that much more real. With the holiday just around the corner, and the presence of that trademark mascot everywhere, I find it hard not to mentally retrace the tragic events of my childhood. I grew up in a very small town called Clifton. The town's population is less than 300. Everyone knows everybody, and everyone knows the local legends. The one I grew up hearing was about the Bunny Man and the Bunny Man Bridge. It seems everyone has heard of the Bunny Man now, but back then, the legend seemed to reside in our town only, like a dirty little secret withheld from the light of day, lest the rest of the civilized world see it. For those of you who haven't heard the story, it goes something like this. Decades ago, a bus full of convicts bound for an insane asylum were driving along the roads outside of Clifton and nearing the railroad bridge on the outskirts. For one reason or another, the driver lost control of the bus, sending it off the road and tumbling. Most of the convicts were killed in the crash. The few that managed to escape were all rounded up before they had gotten very far. Every convict. Except for one, that is. In the weeks to follow, odd things began happening in Clifton. Most of these events revolved around that old railroad bridge. There were some vandalisms, break-ins in the area, and animal mutilations at first. In fact, the mutilations and eyewitness descriptions of the vandal were likely the most notable, resulting in the legend's name. Townspeople reported seeing a miscreant late at night, oddly enough, spotted wearing a bright, white bunny costume. It wasn't long after that when passers-by started discovering mutilated animals hanging from the railroad overpass on the outskirts of town. Hanging from the ropes, under the dull and chilly morning sky, a row of bloody and ravaged rabbits, cold from slaughter, swayed back and forth at their bonds. Each was still moist, underscoring the freshness of the act. The rabbits would be taken down, only to be replaced by more rabbits the following morning, hanging in the same grotesque and repulsive fashion. The woods in the area were searched, but no perpetrator was ever found. It didn't end there, however. One morning, just like many before it, bodies were once again found hanging from the overpass. This time, however, The mutilated corpses were not that of small, helpless white rabbits. The gouged, ripped, and partially scabbed over bodies were that of 3 local teens, discovered to be missing after venturing out on a Halloween night. Most know the story as a Halloween thing, claiming that if you head to the Bunnyman Bridge on Halloween, that at midnight he will appear and kill you. Residents of Clifton, however, claim that the Bunnyman is not exclusive to Halloween night. They'll tell you that if you venture up to that old bridge on any night, that you will meet your demise at the hands of the Bunnyman. A few kids have disappeared over the years since then. Some claimed it was the evil doings of the Bunnyman that were to blame. Eventually, the disappearances and mutilations seemed to just stop. Or at least, that's what they say. No one knows why. Some say the Bunnyman died, while others say he's still out there, hiding and waiting. Legend has it that if you stand upon the railroad tracks at the Bunnyman Bridge late at night, at midnight, he will appear. No one knows what happens next, because the legend also says that once you see him, you never live to tell about it. My best friend Trent. He was a great guy. We loved playing Super Mario Bros. Together and enjoyed exploring the woods that connected our backyards. During rainstorms, we would sometimes go outside and throw sticks in the ditch by the road just above the culvert at the end of the driveway. Then we'd run to the other side to see how long it would take for it to come through. I remember sometimes we'd even have races with the sticks, spending hours in the pouring rain doing not much of anything of relevance. He was a great friend. The kind of friend you never forget, even with the mind-dulling effects of adulthood. It was Trent's idea to stand up to the kids at school. I usually would just walk away from a taunting dare, but Trent was convinced I should stand up to the bullies and show them that I wasn't scared. I guess he was probably right. I grew up hearing all about the Bunnyman and the Bunnyman Bridge, living only right down the road from it. Granted, it was about a mile from my house, but there weren't many houses nearby, and the ones that were around were very much spaced apart, separated by distances much greater than that of the domiciles residing in more urban areas. Meaning, in relative terms, the Bunnyman Bridge was only down the road from me, practically right next door. A lot of the kids at school would ask me questions, like if I'd ever seen the Bunnyman. It all just seemed like a joke to me, and I'd just tell them no, in the manner of this context. Then again, I'd never gone up there at night. Once, Trent and I did ride our bikes there during the day, but it was broad daylight and felt safe. We didn't see any hanging bunnies or anything unsettling, so we just figured it just to be a crappy local myth. We didn't spend much time there before returning home, probably to play Super Mario at my house. I never gave going up there at night any thought, until the day I got stopped in the hall on the way to the bus after school. A couple of older kids had me cornered and were taunting me, telling me that I lived down the street from the Bunnyman and that he was going to kill me. Trent oversaw as he approached the exit to the school and stepped in. He was a little taller than me, so it felt good knowing that I had someone at least a little more intimidating than me on my side. Trent told them that the Bunnyman wasn't real, and that we weren't scared of him anyway. That's when one of the older kids joked with the others, saying that we'd never even been up there. Not at night. So how would we know? Trent got silent. He knew they were right about that. The kids told us they were going to beat us up if we didn't meet them on the Bunnyman Bridge at midnight. Looking back, I ask myself what would persuade me to believe them. But I guess the gullibility of a child knows no bounds. Neither Trent nor I said anything. The kids just gave us each a sinister snicker, chuckling to themselves, before they walked away, laughing amongst each other. I was right about to turn to Trent and say something when the tallest one looked back over his shoulder and stopped. He looked me dead in the eye and mouthed one word. Now, I'm not much of a mouth reader, and I could do nothing of the sort at the age of 10, but I distinctly identified what he said without a sound. Midnight. It was Friday, and Trent was sleeping over at my house. We would have a sleepover every Friday, alternating between his house and mine every week. This weekend it was my turn to have him over. We spent very little time that day talking about what the older kids had said. I think we both just tried to forget about it on the bus ride home, and then there were too many adults around my house. It wasn't until that we had retired to my bedroom for some video games after dinner that the subject got brought up again. I'm not sure who brought it up first, but I know it was Trent that was insisting that we would go. I honestly didn't want to sneak out because I was more afraid of my parents and bullies than the Bunnyman. But Trent insisted that the older kids were probably just trying to scare us and wouldn't even show. He then sweetened his argument by saying how brave we would seem by going to the supposedly haunted bridge at midnight and waiting for the Bunnyman. After nothing had happened and we had returned home, we would be able to tell everyone that we had performed such a courageous act. The blissful ignorance of youth. I held firm for a long time, long after my parents had gone to sleep. It wasn't until Trent and I found ourselves bored and wide awake at about a little after 11 o'clock that we decided to go. Honestly, looking back, I know now that what had pushed me to head to the Bunnyman Bridge with Trent was the pure, simple act of sneaking out. I had never, ever snuck out of my house after my parents had gone to sleep. Hell, I knew that if I had got caught, I would be in deep shit with my parents. The feeling that I had to go because of what the older kids had said, combined with the desire to sneak out just because, played upon each other and strengthened a resolve for going through with it. Armed with nothing more than a Halloween flashlight to guide our way, Trent and I opened the bedroom window on the first floor and crawled out. Once in the yard, Trent and I realized that we only had my bike. His was at his house, as he arrived with me by bus. Luckily, I concluded with him. He and I used to play around a lot on our bikes, and we had perfected the art of having one pedaler while the other one sat on the handlebars. Trent wanted to do rock, paper, scissors to see who would sit on the handlebars. Even though it was my bike, I allowed him a chance. After all, it wasn't his fault that he didn't have his. Nevertheless, Trent chose scissors and I chose rock. He would be sitting upon the handlebars, with Trent in the front of my line of sight and lighting the best we could with a little skeleton flashlight. We rode silently into the darkness and onward to the Bunnyman Bridge. There was nary a sound in the night, only the hum of the bicycle's tires against the pavement beneath. Being such a short distance away, it was only minutes before we had arrived at the gaping tunnel before us, the underpass of the Bunnyman Bridge. Trent hopped off just as I stopped, and I leaned the bike against a tree about 20 feet into the woods. That way, if a car came by in the dead of night, a child's bicycle wouldn't be viewed loitering near the bridge, an assured red flag of scandalous activity. After I stashed the bike, I walked over to my friend, now standing and staring down the gaping maw of the underpass. I remember as I watched him standing there, the thing looked as if it would just swallow him whole. But the cement did not move nor come to life. The odd, eerie, and invasive feelings seemed to add up to those created by ghost stories, the fright of darkness, and the unknown lying in wait within. Trent looked down at his watch. It was the face of one of the Ninja Turtles. It was a Leonardo watch, if I remember correctly. He looked at me and told me it was just about time, stating it was 11:55. We had just made it. I gulped in fear, more terrified of the awaiting bullies on the top of the bridge than any lurking killer in a bunny suit. Slowly, I crept alongside Trent towards the top of the hill and the Bunnyman Bridge. I felt as though the older kids would jump out at us at any moment, waiting for the perfect time to strike and taunt us, scaring us half to death. A gentle breeze. A couple crickets. That's it. Trent and I stood up there for a few minutes, watching the vacant street below, awaiting our midnight rendezvous. 11:59. Trent and I were right. They weren't going to show. All of this had just been an attempt to get us to come to this location at the time noted in the legend. Nothing more. I told Trent that I wanted to go home, and that I didn't want my parents to find out that we were gone, getting me into big trouble. He started to pick at me a bit, jokingly, about how I was scared of the Bunny Man, but honestly I just wanted to go home at that point for the reasons I told him. Joking and chatting, Trent followed me as I retraced our steps down the hill and to the bike. It was when I started down the hill that I heard Trent stop behind me. The sounds of gravel beside the metal track being scuffed and kicked about ceased. I turned back to see Trent standing still as a statue, his right arm extended outward, ending with the tip of his index finger. He was pointing at something, down the tracks a ways. It was out of my line of vision, but he obviously didn't know that because without looking at me, Trent said, "What's that?" I whispered to him, asking what it was he was looking at, but he just told me to be quiet, shushing me more precisely. I did what he told me and stood in place, my eyes never moving from his face, as his never broke gaze with whatever it was that held his interest. Slowly, but very recognizably, I watched the color in Trent's face fade from a fleshy peach color to that of a pale shade of gray, the pigment lightening until a nearly ghost white was all that remained. His eyes got wider, and his jaw began to go slack. Trent dropped the flashlight just before turning and looking at me with the most horrifying of faces, and told me to run. I'll never forget the look on his face. I think I found his look so horrifying because it was the incarnation of horror itself. I saw terror in his eyes, and I knew that if I would see what he had seen, I would be just as disturbed and dismayed. I turned to run, scrambling down the hill and towards the tree where I had leaned the bike. It wasn't there. I mean, I didn't take a ton of time to look. I knew the situation was urgent, but I'm positive that the bike wasn't there. I turned back and told Trent that the bike was missing before he nearly interrupted me and said, "Forget about the fucking bike, man! Just run!" Our adolescent feet carried us as swiftly as I think they could have, the clatter of our sneakers against the pavement. I turned around once. Just Once. I really wish I hadn't, but I had to, just to see if our continued sprinting was necessary. And it was. He was there, chasing us, running down the street behind us, his bunny costume baggy and flopping over his body as it pushed through the air, the result of its wearer running after us. The white fur that covered it was stained a dark red, almost brown in the front, presenting itself in splotches and smears. In his right hand, moving back and forth as he chased us, was a gleaming, dual-tipped hatchet. I never got a look at his face, because whoever he was had his head covered with a smiling rabbit's head, buck teeth, and large, black, glossy eyes. It seemed as though the stitched mouth was formed into that of a very slight, almost unnoticeable smile, and its ears were long and gently supported, pushed back in the wind and flopping around as he pursued us. I know Trent was there practically the whole time. He even exclaimed out that we were almost there when we rounded the corner and landed sight on my house. I ran past the front door and to my unlocked bedroom window. I didn't care about waking up my parents at this point, but I figured the door was locked, and there was no way I was going to spend the time fumbling around with the extra key under the mat. I speedily opened and practically flew through my bedroom window. I clambered back to the window pane to shut it when I realized I had to wait for Trent to come through. It wasn't long before I realized that something was very wrong. He wasn't there, and he should have been right there. There shouldn't have been any waiting. Trent was right behind me the whole time. I started to panic, internally arguing with myself regarding whether or not I should close the window. That's when my bedroom door burst open with a bang, slamming into the wall beside it. The sound made me jump and turn around at the same time. I screamed in terror, sure that the bunny man was in my house and now in my bedroom. Even after I landed eyes on my parents, it still took a few moments to convince my mind that it wasn't the terrible visage I had seen chasing us just moments prior. My parents looked very cross, staring at me and the open window behind me. I figured that the jig was up, and now they would know what I did. I honestly didn't care about that anymore. Angry or not, I was so very pleased to be reunited with my mom and dad. I found out later that my father did indeed inspect the room to find us both gone while we were out, and that the two of them had called the police in an attempt to locate the two of us. I tried telling my parents about what I had seen, what had been chasing us in the dark, what I was sure now had Trent and was doing God knows what to him. They both held their looks of concern, but as I told them what I had experienced, it was joined by another look, one I think they hoped to keep hidden from me. But I had seen it before, only to a much more drastic extent. The look on Trent's face. Dread. When the police showed up at my parents' house, they began asking me all kinds of questions. I remember my mom and dad telling the policeman that they'd rather I be allowed to sleep. But I overheard him tell them that there was a dead boy on their hands, and that they needed to know now, in detail, what I had witnessed. My heart sank. Trent? I ran downstairs and right up to the cop. I told them about the bullies and about the bunny man, how Trent and I had seen him, how he had chased us, and how he had Trent. I asked the man if Trent was the dead boy that they had found, but he wouldn't answer. He formed another look on his face that I didn't quite recognize when I asked him this. I know it now to be shame, likely due to not being careful when speaking to my parents, allowing me to overhear what he had said. He thanked my parents and left, but not before taking my father with him. I didn't understand why he was taking my dad. It was the bunny man, not my dad! Why are you taking my dad? The policeman assured me that he was only taking him in for questioning, but again, I didn't understand. I told them who it was. How many questions did they need to ask? Why didn't they just go out and get him? The following day, I awoke to my parents talking in the kitchen. I crept up to a nearby doorway and eavesdropped on their morning conversation. My father had been released in the early, dark hours of the morning. The cops apparently felt they had enough evidence to conclude that he was no longer a suspect. I then overheard him tell my mom that Trent's family met him at the station, asking him what had happened, crying and trying not to place blame. He told her, though, that the worst part of it all was how they found the body. While on the search for both Trent and I, the police happened to take the road through the underpass of the Bunnyman Bridge. When they did, they found the broken, mutilated body of Trent hanging from the bridge above.
Well, while you're coming up with some good hiding places for your egg hunt, take note of those big enough to hide yourself in as well. But make sure not to hide away for too long, or you'll miss out on the terrorific fun next weekend. And speaking of which, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that I can catch you all next Saturday.